Hello everyone, welcome to Daisystalls. So for most of my projects, I very often get inspired by my surroundings, and as fall has been setting in, the leaves have been turning all pretty, and I hear shots from bird hunters on the fields around us, and it got me kind of inspired to make a hunting set fitting for the season. To begin with, I'm picking out my recently completed Hutchel mare as my base model. And despite having the initial spark of inspiration, I definitely needed to refine that a bit, so onto Pinterest I go. As I was scrolling, I was starting to remember this saddle I made 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, here it is. I wasn't planning on using an old saddle for this project, but it's too perfect, man. I also plan on this set being really decked out, so even without the saddle, there's more than enough crafting ahead of me. I want to make a side pull bridle with some braided details. I also want to have lots of storage, bedrolls, and saddlebags. She's going on a hunt, so a rifle and rifle holster seem obvious. I also really want to try to carve a little wooden cup or kuksa, which is a staple Scandinavian hiking essential. A breastplate and flank cinch are also on my list, but enough planning for now, let's actually start creating. I'll begin with the hardware for the bridle, which I'm making out of thin wire. I made lots of these tiny jump rings before I moved on to an even thinner wire to create tiny buckles. You can get this type of hardware in pretty much all shapes and sizes online. I have tried it before, and it definitely saves me a lot of time and looks professional. However, there's this authentic feel to the ones made out of wire that can't quite get reproduced with the store-bought ones, so I find the tedious homemade route to be worth it for the end result. So this little buckle has now been made into a tongue buckle, and well, this happens a lot, and I usually end up searching for it, looking like an idiot for a few minutes before giving up, but on this day I actually found it again. Once all those little pieces are done, I'm moving over to prepping my leather. I need to get it really thin for it to work on this small scale, so I'm using a leather skiver and shaving down the backside. It looks like a soothing process, and this time it went surprisingly well. However, other times when the knife is constantly ripping holes in the leather, it's a lot less relaxing. I use some leather dye to color it dark brown to match the saddle, and I'll also be testing out a new medium. This gel-like substance is called gum tragacanth, and I'm rubbing it briskly on the backside of the leather to slick it down and make it look smooth and neat. Once dry, the leather is ready to use, and I'm starting out by cutting some extremely thin strips and trying my best to braid them together. This was so finicky, partly because it's tiny, but mostly because I wanted all the straps to be facing the same way in the braid. It looked hopeless for a while, but with some perseverance, I ended up with a pretty decent result. On the straps that get cut a little thicker, there is more room to add more detail. In this case, I want to add imitated stitches. In the past, I just did this with a needle and a steady hand. However, for a much neater and quicker result, I recently made myself this little stitching wheel out of spare clock gears and other parts I bought for cheap on AliExpress. The strap gets used to hold 2 jump rings onto the braided piece. I attached 2 thinner strips to this, one through a slit in the leather and one through the jump ring. I then joined those 2 together with another jump ring to form that classic side pull triangle, and we have the beginning of a noseband. I attach one of the tongue buckles to a separate strap, and I'm gluing that to the top jump ring on the triangle. That gets repeated on the other side, and I also added some little metal strap holders just underneath the buckles. I thinned down some dark tan leather and cut super thin straps out of it, and I'll be gluing one horizontal and 2 vertical pieces of it onto anywhere on the bridle that has been folded over and glued. This is also very fiddly, but I think it makes the bridle look kind of sturdy, and I love the accent color. Another strap and another buckle will finish up the noseband. I just thread it on the jump rings and measure how long I'll need it. Now, naturally, for the tongue buckles to function, there needs to be holes in the strap it's connecting to. And to create these, I'll be using an empty ink pen. This one had a 0.05mm tip, and once that tip is removed, I'm just left with a thin cylinder, which is perfect for punching tiny holes. I can now actually close the buckle on the noseband, and I also added a couple wire strap holders just to finish it off. I measure and attach one more strap with a buckle attached to it to the top jump ring of the triangle. Then on a separate strap, I punch some more holes and will be gluing this to the same ring on the opposite side. Can't forget about the accent detail. We're still missing the crown piece, which goes behind the ears. This is created by cutting one thick strap, which on either side I'm splitting about 1/3 of the way up. The split ends get holes punched into them, and this process requires a lot of precision to make the holes as centered as possible. I also create the throw latch, which is just a strap I measure and attach a buckle on either side to. Once I assemble these pieces, the bridle itself is done, and I'm very pleased with how it's looking. I still need to make the reins, though this is usually a pretty straightforward process, but I wanted these to be made out of braided leather to match the bridle, so that took a few extra hours for sure. I attach a buckle to a separate strap, which I'll be gluing onto the braided one. I do the same to the other side and add a few extra details. I can then attach the reins to the jump rings, and with that, the bridle is complete. The braided leather was my earliest idea for this piece, and I'm really happy I followed through with it because I think it looks awesome. I naturally have to document a little for my Instagram story, and quick reminder to follow me over there if you want to see some more sneak peeks and behind the scenes stuff. But a package from a member of the model horse community has just arrived, and I'm quite eager to see the contents, so let's unbox it together. I've seen a lot of pictures of this model already, but actually holding it in my hands, it's a completely different experience, and my goodness, she's gorgeous. So this is Lunaris. She's an Arlov trotter mare sculpted by the artists of O.G. Equine. I'm so impressed by all the details that are packed on this little model, and that's not even it, because I was sent 2 models, and look at him. This is Lunaris' counterpart, Solaris, who has an equally majestic flowing mane with individually sculpted hair strands. The attention to detail and the lifelike wrinkles and veins, it's truly gorgeous and realistic, and unlike anything I've seen in a model before, I think. I may have become a little partial to this guy. I really like his curious pose. Both models, among others, are currently available on OG Equine's website in traditional scale. They are limited edition, so unfortunately the smaller ones I have here are already sold out, but if you're interested in the bigger ones, go ahead and check them out. Thank you so much to OG Equine for sending me these 2. So I was going to make the rest of the tack now, but I got so excited about that little wooden cup, so I'm going to make that first. I begin by sketching out the general shape of the thing on this piece of birch wood. Then a saw and chisel is used to remove some of the bulk, which will make the process a bit easier for me down the line. I continue to work on the shape, first with a drill, then by getting out my nemesis, the Dremel, with a grinding bit attached to make that cavity nice and round. At this point, I find the sharpest X-Acto blade I have and start to slowly whittle away at the wood. While I was looking around for reference pictures of these wooden cups, or kuksa as they're called, I found out that they actually originate from the Sami people who live here in Norway and in our neighboring countries. The real thing would be hand-carved out of birch burl and was originally used by the Sami people to collect berries and such. I did find this carving process to be really fun, and also shaving off those chunks of wood is really satisfying. Once the shape is good, I'm cutting it off from the rest of the wood in a very unsafe looking way. Ooh, I'm lucky that went well, I think. After finishing it up a little with some sandpaper, I drill into the handle to put a leather strap through it, and it's done, and so adorable. I love it so much. It fits my rider doll perfectly, and I'll also be making her some stuff later in the video. But first, I'm going to make the breastplate. I start with the hardware again, though this time it's not as fiddly as for the bridle. These pieces are a little bigger. When looking for ideas for this set, I came across this one picture and I really liked the look of the breastplate. I tried to find out what kind it is so I could find more pictures of it, but the closest I got was polo breastplates, but is that quite right? I'm not sure, but I like it, so we're making something similar. So I'm using my handy tracing wheel to create stitch marks on the base piece of the breastplate. Then I'm actually applying the gum tragacanth to the right side of the leather, and I'm hoping this will kind of set the stitches and keep them looking crisp. I add a couple strap holders by the buckles, and have a look at this piece, which I've applied the gum to, versus one that has only been dyed and thinned. There's such a big difference. The gum makes it look so neat and professional. I'll definitely be using it more in the future. I make sure to add everything that needs to be glued to the back of this piece before I make the padding, which is simply a piece of leather I've applied some water to make it a bit softer, and I'm using a ruler to crisply fold it in on each side. Yeah, I really like the proper look I got with the padding. Next, I make, big shocker, more straps with more buckles. These will connect to the D-rings and connect at the withers. I quickly measure how long I need the straps connecting to the girth to be, and once those are glued on like this, the breastplate is done, and I have to say I'm very pleased with it. I think it turned out really neat. So there's obviously a lot left to do on this set. I want to add a lot more stuff and details, but I also want to make my rider doll some fitting clothing and accessories. I have some ideas, so let's have a look in the fabric drawer to see what I have to work with. Don't look too closely though, I need to do some organizing in here. But I just picked out a bunch of fabrics in the color scheme I was thinking, and actually almost all of these pieces are harvested from old clothing, which honestly I've found to be the best and cheapest way to find fabric for miniatures. I'm starting out with my mother's very old pantyhose, which she graciously donated. Thanks, Mom. The same pattern I used to create the fleece jacket in my rider doll video gets slightly tweaked to become a baggy sweater instead. I trace all the pieces and cut them out. And the process of sewing it together is pretty much exactly the same as for the jacket I mentioned. I'll leave a link for that video down below, which has a more thorough run-through of how to do it, as well as printable patterns. One thing I've never sewn before, but really wanted to add, was cuffs. I totally winged it and started by sewing a tube out of a smooth part of the same pantyhose. I then kind of halfway turn it inside out so it's double like this. While the sweater is still inside out, I place the cuff in like this and will be sewing around the circumference. Now, turning the sleeve right side out is the moment of truth. Did this actually work? Well, it looks like, yeah, it actually worked really well. And it looks so cute on the doll already. I'm obsessed. I apply the same process to the other sleeve as well as to the neck opening, and I'll finish off the hem in the same fashion. As with everything else so far, apparently, I am very pleased. Booty! I think it turned out adorable. So, I want to make my doll a newsboy cap or a fiddler's cap. It looks like this. There was like a million names for it online. I really wanted it to be dark brown, so I've searched my drawer and searched the entire house too for scrap fabric, but I did not have the right color. I really had to rack my brain, and I started thinking about my leather dye, which is the perfect color, but I didn't think it would work for fabric, but it did. Now for the pattern, I have a tendency to make things a little harder than it needs to be, so I started to just sketch up a pattern from scratch, calculating the circumference, using the pi and all of that, and I've never really sewn a hat like that before, so it didn't work out. Luckily, I remembered that I actually have a perfectly scaled bucket hat pattern for my doll. It doesn't have quite the right shape, but it will give me a much better starting point. Or that was my thought, at least. I can't afford any unraveling on these tiny pieces, so I fray check them all before I start to sew the top and side together. It turned out to be a lot harder to get this right than I thought. I ended up with one too big, one too small, but I think I've ironed out the problem. I need the side to flare towards the top and not towards the brim. Yes, third time's the charm. It looks slightly ridiculous, but this is what I need. Now I cut this curved brim out of leather, which I'll be sewing onto this straight band. I think we'll need some movie magic up in here because this was just impossible to film. I'll also be top stitching this, which means sewing through leather and fabric at the same time. It was a bit of a pain too, but as usual, it's worth it. Initially, going into making this hat, I was so confident. I was like, yeah, I could just wing it, it'll be fine. Well, X amount of failed patterns, failed sewing attempts, and about 3 tutorial videos later, and I think I thought a little too highly of myself to start, but I did also end up with a pretty darn nice looking hat. I'm gonna add a few little signature details to it to finish it off. Okay, but look at this though. It's so cute. It's so cute. Cute to the point where I got really inspired and I was like, I want one. So I bought one. Me purchasing clothes after making it for my doll has happened more than once now, but I'm not mad about it. It's really cute. Alright, so despite having plans on adding several saddlebags to this set, I think it will only be right to also have a backpack for my rider. I'm much more comfortable with just whipping up a pattern for this one, as it's only a square for the bottom with a long rectangle for the sides. I sew on a couple exterior pockets, a bottle holder, as well as these drawstring details, which I think makes the whole thing look a lot more intricate and interesting. Now, I usually don't work with deadlines. However, for this project, there is kind of an inevitable deadline with the arrival of fall, the plants and trees are starting to die, and that does not make for pretty backgrounds for taking pictures. In the past, I have completed projects in late fall. The trees had already started dying, so I had to wait the whole winter and the whole spring until it was summer and nice looking again outside to take the pictures and post the video, so I really don't want that to happen again. I post sparsely enough as it is. At this time it was raining so much and I could see my photo locations getting muddy and dull, but I know stressing and rushing won't make for good results, so I'm just gonna go slow and steady. I sewed on some leather flaps and will be gluing on some straps and buckles as closures, made with golden wire this time, just to switch things up. Some studs add extra detail, and I'm actually pressing these into the leather using pliers. This is a small step, but I found it did a lot to add realism. I add the shoulder straps along with a few finishing details before I start to ruin what I just made. Just kidding, of course. I'm just going to distress it a bit with some sandpaper and paints to make it look old and worn, which I love the look of. I had jeans in mind for her outfit and I already have a pair, so I put her in those along with these cowboy boots. The shoes won't really matter though, and I hope you'll forgive me for not making them this time, as they'll be covered up by some gaiters. They will be green, but they're not alligators, they're gaiters. I sketched up a pattern which I cut out of a thin fabric I dyed with a green pro marker. These were fairly simple. I just added a brown band up top, hemmed the bottom, then folded it in half and sewed the sides together. I ended up adding a few extra details off camera, but I think these were a nice addition. There's something different. Now for hair. I already have several of these magnetic wigs, which kind of remind me of that one Polly Pocket doll I used to play with as a kid. Anyway, I had a very clear vision for a low bun hairstyle, which I don't have, so we're gonna make one.
When will you wear wigs?
So, my wig cap making technique has changed since making my rider doll video. These days I only use resin to make it, as I found it to be the quickest and easiest way. I just make sure to use a no-wipe UV resin to avoid that sticky layer after curing. I hate that stuff. Once the cap is made, I start to glue on the acrylic yarn wefts, which I had left over from making previous wigs. I actually only glue on one weft for the back of the head and two for the part. The rest of the scalp gets painted in a color similar to the hair, which I definitely should have done before gluing the wefts on, but I did not remember. I press the part flat with a hot knife, and of course add the magnet to the inside. Then, just for fun, while the hair is still long, I tried on the hat, and she kind of,
She ate that up.
But I have some different plans for the hairstyle. So I gathered it first into a ponytail, making sure there are no bald spots, and I used a little bit of glue onto the scalp so the hair doesn't shift around. I gather it into a bun, but what I didn't foresee is that I would end up with these two tails of hair that I don't need. Well, I ended up just chopping them off, which was a little scary, but you know what? It turned out just fine. But don't do that on yourself. Whenever I'm out in the moist fall air, my little baby hairs usually curl up like this, so I thought that would be a cute addition. I cut and styled them a bit to try to tone down the very Regency-esque look I was getting. Aw, I like it. I feel like I'm just tooting my own horn throughout this whole video, but what can I say? I'm happy with the stuff I make. Alright, we're getting closer to the finish line, but a few touches remain. I'm making a little burgundy scarf for Liv out of this bigger scarf. I'm going to use one half of this cheap necklace closure and glue it onto a painted bead to make this adorable little thermos. A knife is certainly a must on a hunting trip, so I'm carving out the handle out of a popsicle stick. I add on a little metal ring and insert the knife blade, which is just made out of some metal from packaging. I ended up really liking these wood carving projects, so I actually made 2 knives and 2 kuksa cups just because I can. The thermos fits nicely on the side of the backpack, and I made a leather holster for the knife, so Liv can pull that out whenever she needs to defend herself against bears or threatening men. I'll be needing a couple straps to secure the flank cinch to the saddle, and I'll be using this gorgeous pinkish burgundy silk ribbon and painting a black stripe in the middle of it. The very last thing I'll be making is a saddle pad, and I remember getting a comment in a previous video that was like,
"That saddle pad is really basic, you could have put more effort into it."
And the answer is yes, but I just really don't feel like it. With the admittedly bland saddle pad done, we're finally ready to tack the pony up. This flank cinch was made for my previous Western hunting set, and I'll be using the straps I just made to attach it. This saddlebag was made specifically for this saddle when I made it back in 2020, and same with these front bags. This rifle holster was made just before I decided I was going to film the process of this set. It's not incredibly intricate, but I do wish I got it on camera, so sorry about that. I add the rifle, which I also made for that previous Western set, and the cook set is attached with a simple carabiner I made out of wire. Now Liv just needs to throw on her backpack, and the girls are finally ready for a hunt. Once a sunny day finally rolled around, we drove out to a beautiful photo location, and once we got there, everything kind of turned to chaos, which I'll spare you the details of. Oh my god! But I managed to snap just enough pictures. I just realized I didn't even look where I was going. This was a project after my own heart. I've always been a big fan of making little individual items, which this whole thing consists of pretty much. I had no plans of making this set before basically starting on it. I had just begun creating a much bigger project, which I had planned on for weeks. However, that gave me the biggest creative block I'd had in years. So I knew to get out of it, I needed to do something I really like, and so this set came to be. I'm happy to report that that creative block is long gone. This project made me so happy and inspired, and I have so many ideas I just can't wait to realize. The progress is just frustratingly slow, but that's just how it is. Well, enough of my yapping. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you stick around, subscribe maybe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!